Welcome to the second part of exercise 35, just going to focus on the immune response. So really the lymphatic and immune systems are kind of two halves of a whole. The lymphatic system is all the kind of framework, the structural components, and then the immune system is then kind of the functional components, right? If the lymphatic system is kind of the surveillance tower, the guard tower, then the immune system is kind of the army people, soldiers sitting in the tower, helping us to stay safe and helping us to stay healthy. So if you like to think of the immune system as your body's army, which I think is an analogy that works really well, you have kind of multiple layers of immunity. Now, when we talk about an immune response, we're typically talking about what we call adaptive immunity, which is the T cells and the B cells that are kind of being stored and housed in the lymphatic system. But you also have something called innate immunity. That's things like neutrophils that can do phagocytosis and kind of Pac-Man and eat toxic and things that are debris. The inflammatory response, which is what you see here, which helps bring in healing cells. Fever is a very normal response to your body being injured. Your skin itself acts as a barrier that keeps you healthy and safe. So if you think of the immune system as an army, the innate immunity is the seamen and the privates. It's the soldiers, whereas the adaptive immunity is the special forces. It's the Army Rangers. It's the Navy SEALs, because the innate immunity is very non-specific, whereas the adaptive immunity is very, very specific. So innate immunity is always ready, always available, and so if you are injured, it immediately kicks on. Or in the instance of our skin, helps us kind of prevent being injured in the first place. But adaptive immunity kind of has to be activated. It has to be called up to fight the battle. And then that takes a little bit of time, but it's much more targeted. So innate immunity is kind of like, let's just shoot a bunch of missiles in the air and hope we hit something. Whereas adaptive immunity is, we have got the radar, we've got the target lock, and we're going after a specific thing. So you really kind of need both the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity kind of working hand in glove to keep you safe. And luckily, generally, for most of us, they do a fairly good job of that. Now, this particular lecture is going to focus on the adaptive immunity, because that is typically what we're talking about when we talk about an immune response. So these adaptive immune defenses can help protect us against practically anything, whether that's some sort of infectious agent, a bacteria, a virus, a parasite, or even something abnormal in our own bodies, like a cancerous cell. It also then not only has its own set of kind of responses, but it can actually kind of amp up those innate immune responses as well. So the adaptive immune response is incredibly, incredibly vital. There are, however, 4 characteristics that we apply to adaptive immunity that are kind of key to how the adaptive immunity works. The first is the specificity. When a B cell responds to a specific antigen, it is responding to a single specific antigen. It is very, very, very targeted. That makes it really, really effective, but it is also part of the reason that it takes a little bit of time to come on. The adaptive immune system is also systemic. Something like inflammation would only occur kind of in that initial area where the injury occurred, but the adaptive defenses, they're everywhere. They're going to go in your blood, they can travel through the body, and so they can kind of mount a more system-wide response, which also makes it more powerful. It also is capable of self-recognition. Your immune cells recognize your body's cells versus kind of cells that are not from the body, right? So self-antigens versus non-self antigens. When the body or when the immune system can't do that, that's when you end up with an autoimmune disease. Something like multiple sclerosis, where your body's immune cells attack the oligodendrocytes in your brain so that you don't have any myelin, or in HIV and AIDS, where your immune cells attack your body's immune cells, attack your T cells. Or in rheumatoid arthritis, where your body's immune cells attack your joints. In all of those instances, it's a failure of the regulatory response, and your body loses the ability to recognize a self-antigen versus a non-self-antigen. It basically thinks your self-antigens are, non-self, and something to be attacked erroneously. But that ability to recognize self from non-self is a very important aspect of adaptive immunity. And then the other really cool and huge advantage to the adaptive immunity is its ability to have memory. So if you get a bacterial infection, for instance, your body will mount an immune response to that bacterial infection, and if you get that infection again, your body will be able to mount a stronger attack to that same bacterial infection, because it's already got this kind of ready-made pool of immune cells that know that that specific antigen is toxic to us. So let's take a look at that. So here, you can see here was our first exposure to antigen A, and by about a week and a half later, your body has started to produce antibodies, or at least peak antibodies to this particular antigen. This is our primary immune response. But now let's say we get a second exposure to that same antigen. Not only does it kick on much sooner, within a couple days as opposed to a week and a half, look at the size of the response. We are able to produce many more antibodies and immune cells upon a second exposure to an antigen. This is the basis for vaccines, and why vaccines are so incredibly important and useful. Immunological memory allows us to have stronger responses and faster responses to antigens that we've already experienced, that we've already seen. And that is an incredibly powerful tool for our body. So let's talk about what an immune response looks like. So we start off in the bone marrow, because this is where both the T cells and the B cells are made, right? This is their origin point, the red bone marrow. The little baby B cells stay in the red bone marrow, but the T cells will actually migrate out to the thymus. And there in the thymus, the T cells will become mature, and in the bone marrow, the B cells will become mature, by which we mean they're going to develop something called immunocompetence, meaning they're going to have the ability to respond to antigens, and they're going to develop what we call self-tolerance, which is the ability to not attack our body's own cells. Once you have kind of mature, all grown up, functional T cells and B cells, they then seed out to the secondary lymphoid organs. They're going to seed out to the lymph nodes, to the tonsils, to the spleen, to the Peyer's patches in the intestines. They're going to circulate through the blood and through the lymph, looking for the specific antigen that they respond to. If they encounter the antigen that they respond to, so here we have a particular lymphocyte that recognizes this particular antigen, then we're going to get what we call proliferation, right? Clonal expansion. That particular cell is going to make boatloads of copies of itself, and then some of those copies, some of those clones, will differentiate into effector cells, cells that are going to actually carry out the immune response, and some of them will differentiate into memory cells that are responsible for that stronger, faster secondary immune response. So if we look at what happens with the B cells and the humoral immunity, here you can see you've got 3 different B cells, and here we have one particular antigen. Well, this particular antigen is only recognized by this particular B cell. So this particular B cell is what is then going to proliferate. Now we have activated B cells. Some of those B cells will be plasma cells. They'll develop into plasma cells that will secrete antibodies. The antibodies will go and kind of tag the infected cell and say, hey, this antigen is toxic. Please, other immune cells, if you see it, we have to get rid of it. And then some of those activated B cells will remain in the body for years and years and years as memory cells, so that if you got an infection of this same antigen, you already have a number of proliferated clones that can respond to that antigen, which is why the secondary immune response is so much stronger and kicks on so much faster. If we look at the cellular immunity and the T cells, you'll see T cells will, again, mature in the thymus, but then they'll be activated as well. When T cells are activated, some of them will develop into what we call cytotoxic T cells, which are the ones that can actually go and kill an infected cell. They'll basically attack the infected cell. Some of the activated T cells will become memory T cells. That's what you have here. Some of them will become helper T cells and regulatory T cells. The regulatory T cells are the ones that help us prevent those autoimmune diseases, and the helper T cells actually go and activate other parts of the immune system. This is why if you have damage to your thymus, it is so detrimental to your health, because without a thymus, you're not going to get these activated helper T cells, and thus all of the other parts of your immune system, all of the other parts of that adaptive immune response aren't going to function properly, because the helper T cells are a huge part of getting them activated. And so without a thymus, without helper T cells, you essentially don't have an adaptive immune response. And without that, you're without your Navy SEALs, your special forces, and it really leaves you very, very vulnerable.